All right, it is Wednesday night, and we are glad that you're here. We have a special treat. I don't know if you know Harrison and Hunter Sims, but there are lots of people that love them. Of course, Steve and Denise do. Rusty, I think, kind of tolerates you guys, right? But Judy adores them, and the only person who likes them as much as Judy is possibly me. But Harrison is going to lead us in a opening prayer.
Will you all please pray with me? Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful weather you have blessed us with. Thank you for the beautiful flowers and trees in nature, Lord. Please lift up everyone that is going through struggles right now and show them the light at the end of the tunnel. Lord, I pray for the people that are recovering from or going into surgery, also for the people that are need to pray for. I pray for them right now. Please watch over our government and country, Lord, and show your powers to the people that don't know you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Harrison.
Holy Lord, most holy. Good. Sorry. I will be reading from Ruth chapter 1, 6, 3 through 18. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughter-in-laws prepared to return home from there. With her two daughter-in-laws, she left the place where she had been living and sat down on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why should you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you will go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me be ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her.
Well, that's only appropriate that is what was read today. Hunter, thank you so much for sharing that. That was a story of Ruth and Naomi, and you know what? It didn't seem like Naomi had a whole lot to gain. And she stuck with that decision, and it was one Naomi that Ruth made that turned out to be a good one. But that doesn't always happen that way, and there's proof of that. Because tonight we are celebrating the worst decision that Jamie Havens ever made in her life. And how long ago was this?
5 or 6 years.
No, it was a little longer than that. Do you have any? It's getting close to 20.
I would say.
Are we at number 20? This is the 20th anniversary of Lance and Jamie Havens. So congratulations. Congratulations to Lance for keeping her that long. Jamie, our condolences for you having to put up with him for that long. So that is somewhat of a Ruth and Naomi story in and of itself. So anyway, awesome. We are proud for you guys to make it 20 years, and we know that there's a lot more after that to come. Also, I have an announcement to make. Emmeline, she's a friend of Dallas and Ketis. And they're grandchildren of Dwight Pryor. She got bit by a dog today, and she's at the ER, and they're trying to figure out if rabies were involved and if she's going to need a shot. And so, little Miss Emmeline, if you would please keep her in your prayers as she's out at our ER right now. And also, Keith Elliott was here with us Sunday. And then he got really ill on Sunday night. He had to go to the ER, and he's ended up in ICU, and then he got sent on to Las Cruces, and he's not doing well. So please be in prayer for Keith Elliott as well. So I want to close us out in prayer, and then we're going to be dismissed for classes. Father God, I thank you for being a good God, and Lord, I pray that you will remind us what a blessing it is to be surrounded by people who have these stories of faithfulness through these celebrating these years and decades of marriage, and we're excited for the people in here who've made it to 20, and we know that there's some who've made it in 30 and 40 and beyond, and we're just thankful for that. But I'm thankful that the youth group has been able to see a story of faithfulness that's lived out through Lance and Jamie in their 20 years. And I just pray that you'll bless them with many more. Also for Miss Emmeline, we just pray that you be with her as that she's in the ER right now, and just please let the doctors properly diagnose the situation and give her the medication that she needs and allow her to come home later on tonight. Also, Lord, I just want to ask that you be with the group of kids and adults that are going to be heading out early Sunday morning to go to camp. Just ask that you keep us all safe and allow us to have a week of growth and worship to you. It's in the name of Jesus that I pray. Amen. Okay, thank you all for being here. If you are high school and below, you are dismissed. Okay, so we're going to be starting a new series this Wednesday, and of course I can't have any type of series without having at least 1 week of introduction, but I can promise you that it will not be more than 1 week of an introduction. For those of you who are at home, we just want to thank you for joining us. We always want to encourage you we try to handle this in such a way that you experience the same worship there as we do here. And so tonight, in order for that to happen, I need you to go to your hallway and go to your thermostat and crank it up about 20 degrees. Because we have our AC set on 70 and the thermometer is reading 80. So it's a little warm in here. So if anybody, including myself, starts to kind of lean over and fall, I apologize. But if you want to experience the same thing we are, you're going to have to put on a hoodie and a blanket and open up all the doors and windows and let that warm summer air come in. So what we're going to be doing this summer is something that we did a long time ago, at least as far as I'm concerned. The first summer that I was here, we had a study on the parables. Actually, it was in the fall. And it's been a long time. It was 2012. And so we decided we wanted to start it up and do it again. But this time, rather than having to listen to me the whole time, we have opened it up and we're going to have multiple teachers from the congregation that are going to be sharing their thoughts and their studies about the different parables. So we'll get into greater detail on that, but I'm going to be introducing parables, and why would we even take the time to talk about parables over the next 12, 13 weeks, and then we'll kind of touch on a few of them here and there. So let me grab my notes and we will get started. Okay, so probably get in trouble for this, but I want to share this anyway. There was a couple who became friends and had a really special summer together, and one of them went off to college, the other one stayed home, and later on that other one ended up going to the same college, and they didn't date for a while, and then they dated, and then finally, years later, they got married. Isn't that a really good, touching story? Not so much. Harold's like, I don't really get this. Okay, I don't know if you can remember back in the day, there was an old cop show on, and I'm gonna give you the quote, and you tell me the name of the movie. Just the facts, ma'am. Dragnet, back years ago. I just gave you the facts of a story, but there was so little information and emotion to that it really didn't mean a whole lot to you. So now let me try again. I want to tell it one more time, okay? I just graduated from high school, And I had dated a girl who was a preacher's daughter, and I had sworn off dating for a really long time. That relationship ended, and I spent a lot of time speaking to the Lord and said, God, I'm just stay away from women. I'm just going to focus on you. I'm going to focus on getting my life right and just stop trying to find acceptance and validation from a girlfriend. And then the very next day, these 3 girls walk into this place where I'm working. They all have the same last name, Tyner. And the oldest one is one that I kind of knew for the last 9 years. We'd gone to the same school together, small school together. And I knew her name was Jennifer, and she was an amazing athlete, and she was beautiful, but I didn't want to have anything to do with her because I'd already talked to God about swearing off getting into a relationship. And for the next 3 months, because I was not focused on having a girlfriend, that became one of the most special relationships that I think two friend-only individuals could have. We hung out together all day because we worked at the same place at daycare. I got off an hour earlier. I would go home and get ready, and then by the time I got home, I made my 30-minute drive home, and I would get changed, and then I would drive 30 minutes back, and by then she had gotten home, gotten ready, and I'd pick her up, and we would go to the movies, or we'd go out to eat, or I was helping out with a youth group, and so we'd go to summer youth series. Can you imagine, ladies, that an idea of hanging out with a friend, a guy friend, is going to a summer youth series with a bunch of middle school boys that are screaming and yelling? We went to every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night church together, and we became just absolutely best friends. And the night before we left, I decided that this was the most special woman that I would ever meet, but my heart was broken because she was heading off to Abilene to go to a little school there, and I was staying back at home because I didn't get my junk together, and I knew I was going to spend my first semester at a junior college, and not like NMJC, which is like the junior college. It was like just like a junior college, one of like 50 of them in the Metroplex, TCJC. They called it Taco Jocko. And it was not a great experience. But that last night before we left, we were out there and we were at Lake Arlington, and we were Joe Pool Lake, and we were fishing, and she leaned over and kissed me. And I thought, this is the most wonderful woman in the world. And she went off to school, and of course we grew apart. The regular phone calls became irregular. The regular letters became less frequent. And so finally, January rolled around, and I was now, my first semester at ACU was her second, and I knew that we had kind of grown apart a little bit, but she still was someone very special to me. And I can remember calling her and saying, hey, would you like to go out to lunch and, just kind of catch up? And she kind of hemmed and hawed and said, well, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, I hear the noise of the receiver, because remember, we didn't have cell phones back then. This was her phone. That was a landline in her dorm room. I hear another voice, which I later learned was her roommate, say, Jennifer has a life now, and you're not in it. Click. And I remember, and to Jennifer's credit, she did not do that. But that made for a rocky relationship. Ultimately, things got turned around, and by the end of, or the start of the next summer, we had decided that we were going to give it another run. And we got to celebrate 23 years just a few weeks ago. And it's just a special relationship. And I say all of that to say, I've wasted a lot of your time to say, there is something powerful about story. To tell a story invokes emotions. It causes you to reflect and to think back and maybe put yourself in your situation. And for some of you, you are thinking, well, I understand what it's like to be in Jennifer's shoes, or I understand what it's like to be in Doug's shoes, or you can see the emotions play out. Story is so very powerful. It puts listeners into that moment. It engages the senses. It triggers the emotions, and it captivates the listener. We love to hear stories. We love to tell stories. We even love to make up stories. We share stories at the water cooler. We watch stories unfold at the movie theater or on our TV screens or now on our little phones as we binge watch in bed. We read stories every time we pick up a book. We look for stories. They're what define us and what help us understand the world around us. They touch us. They compel us. They enlighten us. And they shape us. They are arguably the most powerful form of verbal communication. Think about that. Think about how our lives are changed by stories. Jordan B. Peterson, in his book 12 Rules of Living, he talks about the fact that how important it is that we tell our stories and retell them. Because as he argues, that when we tell these stories, we're actually reforming them as we remember them. Because our memories aren't perfect, right? And so we can't go back like a videotape and replay an event that happened in our life. But when we retell that story, we are actually forming what we believed happened. And every time we verbalize that, we are cementing in what we believe and how we perceive that event took place, even if it didn't actually happen that way. One of the things that Scotty has said a lot of times, he says, there's not two parts of a story, or two sides of the story. He says there's three. There's what he thought and what she thought, and then what really happened. And as we tell stories, it helps us kind of define and determine what we believed, imagine what really happened. And it is to no surprise that both God, through the Bible, and Jesus, through his ministry, used stories to help us understand who they are. It's one of the reasons why I just love the Bible. It's filled with lots of little stories that make up one grand story. It's a story that is used to help us learn and connect and even teach others about the story of Jesus and the love of God. The story of a loving, forgiving, jealous, and passionate God is found all throughout the Old Testament, but it's also found in the New Testament as well. And while we could spend several years on the story of Jesus, I just want to spend several months looking at the stories of Jesus. Now, we don't call them that. What do we call them? We call them parables. So the first question is, and I already know your answer, but I want to make sure you remember it. What is a parable? That's right. If you haven't heard that once, you haven't heard it 1,000 times. A parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I can remember hearing that as a third grader sitting at Mayfield Road Church of Christ in Arlington years and years ago. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So a parable, the word itself, is a transliteration. We have several of those in the Bible. And what that simply means is, rather than interpreting that word, we keep the phonetic sound of that word and then we attach a meaning to it. Can anybody think of an example of a word that we use in the New Testament that is a transliteration? Baptism. I was about to say it's right behind us here. Baptism, that word baptize is a Greek word, baptizo. It literally means what? To immerse. But rather, when people, the interpreters got to that word, rather than saying to immerse, they kept that word baptize. And so now that's a word that basically has been coined by the religious realm. That we talk about this idea of baptism. Now it's leaked out and other people use that. But for the most part, baptism, it is just a transliterated word. Parable is the same thing. Okay? But what's interesting is parable is actually two different words in the Greek. Para and bolos. And para means beside or alongside. And bolos means to throw. Okay, put that together and what do we have? What would parable literally mean? It would mean to throw alongside. That is the literal Greek meaning of that word. Now, when we say parable, we say, oh, it's an earthly story with a heavenly story with an earthly meaning. Earthly story with a heavenly. Now I've forgotten this. I've got to go. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I don't know how I got that mixed up. But a parable is to throw alongside. Jesus would throw a story with familiar aspects alongside a truth that might be harder to stand otherwise. Okay? And he did this often. Now, we see this a lot, and maybe we don't think about it, but a lot of times if you're shopping on the internet, it gets, because it's something we've had to do a lot more of lately, sometimes it's hard to actually get an understanding of the size of the object that you're looking at purchasing. And so what will they do a lot of the times? Have you noticed if they'll show a picture of something, a lot of times they'll place an object in the picture that is a size that you would understand. Okay, so if it's a small object, maybe it's a piece of jewelry or a watch or something like that, they might have that watch or that ring or that necklace, and then they'll also have a quarter alongside it as well. And then all of a sudden you can see, that makes sense. I can't tell you the size of that earring, but I know the size of a quarter. And I can pull out a quarter and I can say, okay, this is the quarter. And in the picture, the earring's this big. So I go, I don't know, that might be a little bit too big. That's basically what Jesus is doing. He's allowing something that seems somewhat difficult to become more relevant, more understandable. And he associates it with something that people could understand. Now, we're going to be looking at several of these. But before we get going, can anybody guess, unless you were in my text group the last few weeks, anybody who hasn't been in that text group, can you tell me how many parables that Jesus spoke in the Bible that we have recorded of in the New Testament? Anybody want to guess? Nobody wants to dare guess. 41. There's 41 different parables. Now, there's a couple of them that are kind of small and some of them that are a little bit the same. We're going to be having, next week, Larry's going to be talking about the new wine and the old wine skins. So that's one, but there's another one that's very similar to that. Does anybody remember the other one that's similar to that? The cloth and the coat. Okay, those are going to be two very similar ones, but they're two different ones. So all in all, there's going to be 41 different ones that you note throughout the New Testament. Now, I just love the story of parables and what they do. But there's a few things that I think we need to keep in mind as we're looking at parables. Okay, and one of them is, when Jesus told a parable, and these are not my words, these are words of several different commentaries and scholars that I listened to have said, is that when Jesus shared a parable, he had one meaning in mind. Okay? He had one specific thought in mind. And I think this is important because sometimes we need to be careful because we can look at some of these stories and we turn them into... is allegories the word? We turn them into an allegory in which we say, okay, I'll give you an example of, let me look at one I want to look at. Oh, I have it circled right here. It's the one of the Good Samaritan, right? And so you can see the story of the Good Samaritan. Can anybody tell me in 30 seconds or less what's the story of the Good Samaritan?
Injured man, Samaritan came by, felt compassion, so gave him healing.
Okay, so there's a man who's been beaten up, he's injured, several people pass by, the Samaritan stops and helps him. Okay, so that's the story. Okay, what was Jesus really trying to teach? When we put that into context, can anybody remember? The man asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, sometimes if we're not careful, we'll look at that story and we'll say, well, and we won't. I don't want to go into too great of detail because Scotty's going to be sharing this one later on in the summer. But we want to be careful of not saying, okay, well, the Samaritan represents this person, and the people who beat him up, they represent this person, and the inn where he stayed meant this, and the coins that were given to make sure that he was taken care of, that they meant this. Jesus was not trying to have all these hidden messages that we had to decode or decipher. His main point was, who is your neighbor? And he told that story in such a compelling way that it plucked an emotional string for his listeners. And I'm sure Scotty's going to go into greater detail as to why that was. So the first thing we need to know is when Jesus would tell a parable, he had a specific message in mind. He wasn't trying to draw these different analogies out or try to figure this out if you have your secret decoder ring. He was working on one specific thought. And how do we figure out what Jesus was really talking about? We have to look at the context. What was going on in the story around what was going around, who just asked a question, what had just taken place, and that gives us a better understanding. Another thing is, and I've thought this was just weird, but sometimes people forget that parables are stories that didn't happen. Right? In fact, I had a friend of mine who went to the Holy Lands just a few years ago. And as they were traveling around, one of their guides stopped and pointed out and says, this is likely the road where the man got beat up and the Good Samaritan helped him out. And it's like, wait, that didn't really happen. That was just a story that Jesus told. And so these weren't stories that had to be factual and then they happened. And so if you ever go to the Holy Lands and they say, well, this is the place where the Good Samaritan took the guy who was beaten up, they just want a better tip because that really didn't happen that way. That was just a story that was told. But another thing that's important for us to see is that as we look at the context of what's happening, we also compare it with what is really happening in the larger story of the New Testament and even the Bible. And so another example that we have is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Anybody familiar with the story of the rich man and Lazarus? Okay, as Jesus tells this story, it's in Luke chapter 16. He's telling this story, right? And he says, okay, there was a rich man who had the big house. There was Lazarus, he was poor. He had leprosy and like the dogs would lick his wounds, but the rich man never paid him any mind. And then the story goes on to be about the rich man dies and Lazarus dies, right? And they're both in eternity. One of them in heaven, the other in hell. And as Jesus tells this story, he talks about how the rich man is in pain in hell, and he calls out and says, hey, have Lazarus give me a drink of water. Just to put a drop onto my tongue because of the pain that I'm in. And Abraham is there, and he's like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. And some people look at that story and they think, oh, this is Jesus who is describing heaven and hell. Right? But that's not what the story was all about at all. Jesus didn't tell that parable. He didn't say, let me tell you a little bit about heaven and hell. As the parable goes on, the rich man realizes the suffering that he's in, and he says, well, what does he say? Does anybody remember? He says, let me go back or send Lazarus back and tell my brothers, warn them that they don't end up here too. And this very prophetic statement was made that even if somebody comes back from the dead, they still won't be changed. The whole purpose of the story, the parable that Jesus told, wasn't about heaven and hell and about how hot it is and if you can get a drink of water. It was about don't miss out on that opportunity. That rich man wasted, he squandered everything he had on earth. And so he was going to be in eternity. And all he could think of, could I just go back and warn my brothers? And that, I think, is the part of the story is Jesus closed out that parable. I think it's something that somebody really said, I've got to change my life. Not just for me, but for my family. I want them to learn something different. Now, does Jesus use parables very often? Absolutely. And sometimes he shares parables because he wants to reveal something. But sometimes he shares a parable. Why? To hide it. Because he doesn't want other people to latch on to what they think they need to know about his coming kingdom and how he's going to be on the throne, and they want to immediately take over. And so sometimes he spoke in such ways that it was intentional about being secretive. And there are different times, and I think Bob is going to be doing the parable of the sower. It's going to be one of those times where Jesus tells that story, and they're going to say, we don't understand this story. What does it really mean? And he's going to explain it to them. And he's going to chastise them a little bit as well. There's lots of different stories that Jesus tells. One of my favorite sets of parables comes in Luke chapter 15. Okay, and there's 3 in a row that he's going to share in that one chapter. And they all start with lost. You remember the 3 losts that Jesus talks about?
Sheep, the coin.
The sheep, the coin, and the son. So, you all know this one, but we're going to do a recap. This is an intro to the parable, so I want to talk a little bit about that. Can anybody tell me basically what happens in the parable of the lost coin? I always start with the lost sheep. What's the story of the lost sheep?
The lady lost one of the 10, and of course this is one I'm going to be doing.
Yeah.
She lost one of the 10, and so she turns all the lamps on in her house, so the house inside is lit up. She is sweeping that house out, looking under every pillow, every crack of the house, trying to find that one coin.
Yeah.
Even though she still has 9, she needed that one to complete the set.
That's right. She cleans out her house, and I don't want to give too much away, but I think we should say what happens when she finds the coin.
She calls all her neighbors, her friends.
And she celebrates. I always wondered how much money did it cost to throw a party after she found that one coin. Did she have to spend that coin to throw the party? She was excited about having that. Okay, what about the story of the lost sheep? Yeah, left the 99, went and found the one. And then Jesus says, I say to you, there will be more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents than 99 who need no penitence. Right? It's just a beautiful story. And the story is that he finds the sheep, and what does he do? He celebrates. So we have a parable of a lost sheep. He leaves the 99. He works. He finds them. And when he does find that, he celebrates. We have the story of the lost coin. She's looking for the lost coin. She sweeps around. She finally finds it. What she do? She celebrates. And then we get to probably one of the most famous parables that we have in the New Testament. And that's the parable of, some people call it the lost son. We also call it what? The prodigal son. And I've preached on this before, and I gave reference to a book, and I've just forgotten the author's name. I should have written it down. It's called Prodigal God, and in a minute I'll think of the author's name. But basically what the author is arguing is that the prodigal actually means like wasteful or lavishly spending, right? And as the author described, and what I later preached on, was the idea of prodigal, the wasteful individual in that story is not the son. That it's God. It's the Father who lavishly wastes on the younger son. So real quickly, story of the lost son. How does it go? How many brothers? Two brothers. What happens next?
You know, it's not, the way I read it, it's not quite all about the son that left with his fortune. It's also about the son who would not celebrate him coming back.
That's right. We have the story of a younger son. He goes to his father. He says, I want my share of the inheritance. Which again, already that's wrong. Because inheritance is something that you get when the father dies. Father's still alive. And he basically says, you know what? I don't want to wait until you're dead to get what you're supposed to give me. Go ahead and give it to me now. And the father just agrees. That's already an odd part of the story. And the son goes off. He squanders his money in wild living and prostitutes in a foreign land. And then what happens? He runs out of food. He runs out of money. He runs out of friends. And all the people who were around him before when he was living up life were gone because his money was gone too. And where does he end up?
Feeding the pigs.
He ends up feeding the pigs. And he looks at the pods that the pigs are eating, and he says, oh, I wish I could have this, but no one would give him anything to eat. And we do spend a lot of time on this, and I don't think it's too unfair, but again, we have to remember the parable is about what? It's about one thing. And sometimes we get really caught up in this younger son. We don't do it so much with the sheep, and we don't do it with the coin, but a lot of times we like to latch on to this younger son who's out in the far country and he's spent all his money, but he comes to his senses. And I love that phrase. He comes to his senses and he says, you know, wouldn't it be better off if I were just a slave, a servant in my father's house? And so he begins to trip back, and I've taught classes and preached sermons and given talks all about on this idea of this young boy who's not so young anymore, who's, you know, has got scraggly hair and a scruffy beard and a stench that follows him, you know, for a mile. And I tell the story of the father who's sitting on the deck of his wraparound porch. And he can look past the caliche driveway because that's where it has to take place. And there's the white picket fence. And I always like to talk about how every day he's waiting for that younger son to come around the corner. And finally, one day, he's there. It's past time. He should already be working. The coffee cup is empty. And he can't hardly get going in his rocker. And he sees somebody come around the corner. And he recognizes the shape and the gait of his walk, and he realizes it's his son. And this is why Jesus chose to use parables, and it's why he was a master at telling stories. Because I cannot tell this part of the story without getting goosebumps. Of an old man who was stripped of a third of his wealth, who was stripped of his pride and his dignity when he heard stories of his son spending money on prostitutes and squandering what he had. And it wasn't like he wrote a check. It wasn't like he broke open the piggy bank and handed him coins. Do you know how their money, how their wealth was, how they collected wealth? It wasn't in dollar bills. It wasn't in coins. It wasn't in IRAs. It wasn't something you looked up on a computer or you got mailed on a spreadsheet. Their wealth was tied up in their land, and their cattle, and their servants. Their livestock and their servants. And so when the young man said, I want my share of the inheritance, what did that mean? It didn't mean that he went down to, Jerusalem Bank and he had a withdrawal. It meant that he sold off animals and servants and land in order for this young boy, this son of his, to get what he wanted. And so you would think that every day he would just get more and more angry as he hears these stories. And he realizes that he's having to work when he wanted to retire. And his other son is having to have to work double hard to make up for the younger son. Right? And so here we have this young boy who starts coming up, and the father does what no good Jewish man should do. He starts running. And he runs and he has his arms open up. And I just don't know how it goes, but the boy had been preparing, the son had been preparing to say, Father, I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me a servant. And his dad cut him off. And he says, stop. You were lost and you're found. You're dead and you're alive. And he called the servants and he said, get the ring and get the robe. And he didn't say any robe, get the best robe. You know where the best robe was hanging? In the Father's closet. That's where it had to be. It belonged to the Father, and he gave it to him. He gave him the ring and the sandals and the robe, and he says, go get a fatted calf. We're gonna slaughter it, and we're gonna eat it, and we're gonna celebrate. And that's part of that story. And the other half of the story is what Dwight talked about, is the fact that it was this older brother who was so furious. And the reason why I wanted to tell that story tonight, even though you've heard it 1,000 times, I've heard it 1,000 times too. I've shared it myself, but for some reason, Lance and I started talking about that specific parable yesterday, and we both stumbled across an aspect of that story that we had never really thought of before. And one of the things that we have been concerned about several years ago when we started asking people to share their testimony or their witness, their stories of how they came to know Jesus, is we didn't want to glamorize the life before Christ. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you hear it, I've seen it before played out, where somebody comes in and says, before I knew Jesus, I had the best party life ever. I could drink anyone under the table, and I was the best dancer in the world. And I met Jesus, and all that stopped. It's like, are they telling a story of how great God is, or how fun they used to be? Right? And so one of the things that we were thankful for is that when we got to hear these stories from Brad and Burnell and several others shared those stories, we started to get to hear how God had changed their life. And it wasn't about glorifying, that party life. But one of the problems that you have with the story of the prodigal son is sometimes people think that in order to be found, they have to be lost. And for some reason, we read the story of the lost son and we think we can't really go back into the house until we go out into the far country. See, here's the deal. The younger son had the most powerful story of forgiveness and redemption. But guess what? So did the older brother. He just had to be willing to walk into the same door that the Father had opened up for his little brother a few hours before. I mean, the older brother had a great story. In fact, truth be told, he has a story that we probably can relate to more for many of us than the story of the younger brother. Not all of us have been out in the far country and have squandered our money on wild living. There's a lot of us, or our stories don't include, well, I got down to the very bottom and I saw what a pig was eating and I thought, man, that doesn't seem so bad. For some of us, we hear that story and we think, man, we don't have that story. We can't really talk about the time that we were in the far country. We really don't know what it's like to be lost and to be found. But the truth is, the older brother had a story that a lot of us can be like, I know that story. That's my story. Because I didn't go off into the far country, but I've wrestled with accepting people who went away, and I don't know if they deserve to be back in. And I just wonder how many people who, if they heard that story told from the older brother, could say, you know what? Now that's a story that I can relate to. You see, the story of the prodigal son, the lost son, it's really not about the idea of what it's like to be out in the far country and being hungry and deciding to come home. And man, we love to talk about that aspect of that story. But really, what's it about? Lost coin, they find the coin, he celebrates. She celebrates. The lost sheep. He goes out and looks for the sheep. He finds it, and what does he do? He celebrates. And the very next story is not about, I hope you go out in the far country and you get lost and realize you need Jesus. It's about what happens when something that is lost is found. Are you the older brother? I can't believe you would let him back in. That son of yours. Or is it about the Father who says we have to celebrate? It's why I love the parables so much. Because Jesus had a way of weaving in. And one of the things that you're going to see over and over again, and obviously that this series is only going to last for the summer, so we don't get to cover all 41 or even close to it. But one of the things that we're going to see over and over again, and I want to challenge you over the summer to go through and read all of the parables. In fact, I have right here in front of me, I made up a list of the parables of Jesus in chronological order. And I referenced where they are in the Bible, because sometimes they're found in multiple Gospels. And I even put a little summary. Now, you may not like the summary, but I just put a little summary of what each one of these really means, like kind of what's going on here. But one of the things that's interesting about the parables of Jesus that we're going to see over and over again is Jesus is going to say, don't wait, get moving, go now. As you look at the parables, and I encourage you to do that this summer, as you read through those, that's a theme you're going to find over and over again. Don't wait. Be prepared. Do what God has created you to do. Sell everything for the kingdom. If someone is lost, get up and go find them. Don't miss out. Stop and look for what is important. Use what you have for the kingdom. Don't miss out on sharing your faith. Use it or lose it. Show up. Be fruitful. Be prepared. Don't miss out on an opportunity to care. Over and over again, Jesus saying, start doing something. And so as we embark on a 12-week study of the parables, I want to ask that you will come prepared and excited and be gracious to our Bible class leaders who are going to be leading us through some different parables over the course of the next several months. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are too. I am almost out of liquids. I'm almost dehydrated at this point. And if I'm hot, I know you guys have to be dying. So I'm going to close out in prayer before anybody else drops, and we'll be dismissed for the night. Father God, I just thank you so much for being a God who is just ecstatic at the thought of a lost child, a lost sheep, a lost coin being found. And if a woman could be excited about one coin that she discovers that was lost, how much more joy in heaven is there when one of your children is found after being lost? Lord, I just pray that we will take that to heart and we'll be reminded that there are people who are lost out there and you are looking for them. Lord, please help us be people who shine the path that leads them back home, that we're the ones who remind them that they are welcomed back in the house of their Father, not as a slave, not as a servant, not as someone who's never quite good enough, but to one who is worthy of the ring and the sandals and the coat. God, may we share that story with other people as we look at the stories that your Son told while here on earth. Lord, may you be glorified in this time. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Sunday is going to look a little bit differently. There's going to be a little over 24 of us who are going to be heading to Camp Bandina, which is between Bandera and Medina. And if you know where that is, good on you, because I didn't know before I looked at a map just a little bit ago. So we're going to be traveling there. I won't be here, nor will Lance, nor will most of the youth group, but we're going to have a guest speaker, Brian McGonigal. Some of you may know him. He's a great friend of mine, and he's agreed to join us. And so he'll be here on Sunday, and then we'll also have services on Wednesday night, in which Larry Love is going. I'm pointing at Tim because Larry, you're going to be our speaker for class this next week. So thank you all for being here. You're dismissed.